The views and opinions expressed on any program are those of the producers and/or the persons appearing on the program, and do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of FRC Media, Bristol Community College, or the City of Fall River.
Hello, welcome to Spindle City Straight Talk. I'm Chip.
And I'm CJ. Good morning.
Nice to be here after the blizzard of 2015.
If that's what they want to call it, I guess so. I mean, I think this was the biggest cluster Fall River has ever had. And for the Director of Community Maintenance to go on the air yesterday and say that 90% of the streets were clear, I want to know where he was. Was he in another world? I mean, on another planet? I'm just not sure.
Well,
so.
yeah, you know, it was a big, it was a big storm. I don't know what rank in Massachusetts. I think it was the sixth largest storm in history in Massachusetts. It was the fourth largest or something in Rhode Island, and it was a fairly big storm. But we had a lot of warning. We had a lot of preparation. A time to prepare. I think people fared a lot better than they did in '78. but it always fascinates me in New England. I mean, we do have winters here. And then when you go to places like Minnesota, upstate New York, and places like that, and Wisconsin, who, they have an inordinate amount of snow also, it's amazing how efficient they are at removing snow. It's like, it always made me wonder why that we don't go up there and actually try to learn from people who really handle this stuff well, that get a lot more snow than we do, and you can probably the next day the streets are down to the pavement. What? And it's like, but every time we have a blizzard, it's a mess.
Well, Chip, it's really interesting because, over the past 6 years I've been hopping on this, that snow removal is ineffective, it's inefficient, and it doesn't do anything to solve community safety issues. I was in Minnesota for over 3 years. We would get 3 feet of snow overnight. The schools were open in the morning, the streets were clear, nobody had a problem. They do snow removal. They have their trucks driving with these huge snow blowers, which blow the snow forward into a dump truck. The dump trucks then go to the nearest park and dump the snow. The only place in Fall River we do snow removal is downtown for the courthouse. We can invest thousands and thousands of dollars of putting backhoes down there and hauling the snow off to the old Watuppa Heights property, but we can't do it for the rest of the city. Here's the way the systems work everywhere else. And Ray Mitchell was on the air and he spoke about this, and he said very clearly that in Canada, they do it this way. You put the parking ban into effect, like they do now. That side of the street, they remove the snow. The next day, the parking ban switches so that the snow removal guys come through and remove it on the other side when they have on-street parking. Most cities and towns in the Midwest no longer have on-street parking. And that clears it right up. The snow is gone. The streets are passable. And in Fall River, where we have these narrow streets, which they make two-way for some off-the-wall and obnoxious reason, it's sad. During this storm, EMS had to radio dispatch. Dispatch had to radio DCM to have a truck dispatched to plow in front of the ambulance so they could get to the emergency scene. And Kenny Pacheco has said in the past, he said it to me, we can't do that. That includes too much of an investment in equipment and property, and our private vendors don't want to do that. Well, you know what? If they want to make money, you got to spend money to make money. That's the old proverb that I've always learned. So if they don't want to do it, then they don't make any money. Their way, they don't make money either way. No, instead we have private haulers out there who are plowing snow in pickup trucks, and they're getting stuck in the snow, compounding the problem. And you have to say to yourself, how can we do this? Now, last year, when I had brought to DCM's attention that I never had a snowplow come by my house. Today, in this past storm, I had 2 plows which drove by on a regular basis with blade up. And we're paying them for this. And then last night, as my street is cleared by Mother Nature, because you can see the wet asphalt, the snowplow came by, blade down, scratching the asphalt, and we're paying for that. So explain to me why all of a sudden our snow removal budget is gone, our streets are impassable, our sidewalks are impassable, and there's nothing we can do about it because DCM says, oh, well, we have to put the snow somewhere, so we put it on your sidewalk. So after we've cleaned my sidewalk, you're going to put it back on my sidewalk. That makes perfect sense. And then I have to go out there and clean that up. Okay.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, it doesn't make much sense, but the fact is it's about politics. You know, most of the contractors, you know, the vendors, they know someone and they make good money, but it's about efficiency. You know, the fact is that, you know, if we're going to do it, why don't we do it right for a change? But this is politics again. Whenever you get a political organization doing anything, like a city or a town or any governmental agency, I should say, there's always this, you know, you get paid for incompetency. I mean, I remember I was in Maine years ago. I went up during a blizzard, and I made it through the blizzard somehow up into Maine, and the storm began to abate a little bit, and after I did my business up there, I was going to try to get home. I got to the entrance of the Maine Turnpike, and a state police officer was there, and he said, where are you going? I said, I'm going to go home. And he said, no, you can't. The turnpike is closed completely. And I said, well, I got here when the storm was going. I said, storm's abating. I said, you know, and he said, no, absolutely, this is the way we do it up here. We shut the turnpike down completely. And then they have just plow after plow after plow. And he said, you can't leave till tomorrow morning. And by tomorrow morning, the thing will be completely clear. And guess what? I had to get a hotel room up there and stay overnight. But the next morning, when I got on the Main Turnpike, it was right down to the pavement. And I went the entire length until I got into New Hampshire, and New Hampshire was clear also. You know, there is a way to do this more effectively and more efficiently. And of course, they're all going to complain about, well, you know, it was a huge storm. Yeah, it was. But, you know, to me, if you're taking 8 inches of snow or 28 inches, it may take a little longer. But if you have a system, the system will work if it's an effective and efficient system. I think there's been a lot of, there have been, a lot of talk about it. I saw an article that said, oh, Fall River was built a long time ago. We have narrow streets. Well, show me any city or town in New England that doesn't have narrow streets, basically, because they were all built in this was one of the original colonies. I hate to tell everybody this, but you're not going to find too many new communities with wide streets. And, this isn't Arizona or someplace like that where they built things like Phoenix. You go to Phoenix, the streets are wide. And this is one of the original 13 colonies, in case you're not sure about that. We are, and therefore, you think the streets are narrow up here, go to Boston someday, and the traffic they handle up there. So it's just mind-boggling, but we get into government, and how government works, and it's all about, in private industry, if you're incompetent, you get fired. In government, if you're incompetent, you get a pay raise.
Well, that seems to be the par for the course here in Fall River. But while we're still talking about government, let's talk about the fact that Mayor Sutter has failed to show. Yesterday, many people in the community have been saying that they have been speaking to his special assistant to the mayor, and lo and behold, they were guaranteed phone calls back that never came. And of course, Ray Mitchell came out and said, well, he's busy and, he's got things going on and we're in a state of emergency and he doesn't have time to return phone calls. He doesn't have time to do this, do that, do the other thing. And Wayne Rigo did the same thing. he came out in defense of the new mayor. He's only been in for 3 weeks. He's got a budget problem. He's got, a snowstorm. Hey, you know what? This is called life. Life goes on. Whether or not you like it, it's what happens. We don't always get to pick and choose when we're going to say or do or be available. But if you say you're going to be available, or your assistant says you will be available, even if you only make a phone call that says, look, I'm really busy, I have 5 minutes, I wanted to touch base with you, or to have Mr. Butaleski, if that's how you pronounce his name, call and say, I'm sorry, Mayor Sutter's been busy. Is there something I can help you with? If not, I will have the mayor get a hold of you. Now, it wouldn't be so bad if it was Joe Smith or, Joan Lewis off the street, but it's neighborhood leaders who are trying to get a hold of him, and he's unavailable. So that right there is ticking off that whole power play group that exists in Fall River. So you have to say to yourself, what do we do? What are you supposed to do about it? Because obviously, it's not a good thing for the mayor. And if you're to judge a man by his first crisis, and this is going to be the guide to follow for that judgment, right now he's an absolute failure in crisis management. And, Fall River would do better to just put a padlock on the front gates, and a fence across the bridge, and say, don't visit us because we can't handle reality. It's a tough statement. I'll probably get nasty phone calls about it, but it is what it is. That's just the truth of the matter. I mean, I don't know what you feel, Chip, but...
Well, I think, obviously, we don't know about how the communications is set up within the structure of Mayor Sutter's office now, and obviously we've got a lot more people in there now. You've got some new people in addition to the older jobs, which is another issue we want to get into at some point in time. But the fact is, if you promise a phone call, I mean, Tip O'Neill said many years ago, all politics is local, and you have to make the constituency feel like that that you care about them. And, if he's busy, say he's busy. Say, we may not be able to get back to you for a little while, and people may not be happy with that, but they will, they have to grin and bear it, because, I mean, it's difficult not to believe that you're busy in the midst of one of the, top 5 snowstorms or so in the history of the state. So, but don't make a promise you can't keep, especially on the local level. And I think it's a lesson that Mayor Sutter is learning very, very quickly. The President of the United States can antagonize a lot of people, but there are also a lot of people that he doesn't, because he's dealing with an entire nation, a governor, a state official. But a mayor, when you upset someone, it's someone that's going to see you tomorrow. They live in your community. They're going to come back and keep complaining, and then you leave a bad taste in their mouth. The thing is, it's not a good, I'm not even sure if he was aware that they were saying they were going to get back at him and back to them. But the fact is, they should not. It shows to me not a well-schooled in politics. I mean, being a DA is not being a mayor. This is political, and I think his people have to learn that. You've got to deal with people every day, and you've got to get back to people. Not only neighborhood leaders, but every single individual that calls. You have to make them feel like, hey, you're a taxpayer, you're a resident, you deserve our attention. And so get back to people. You don't have to get back to them instantaneously, but be upfront, be truthful, tell them. And even if they dislike it, at least you got a fallback. You can say, hey, look, we told you we couldn't get back to you maybe for a day or two. But make a list. Make sure you return every call. That's big. That's politics 101. That's local politics. But that's what politicians do. They forget. They have political amnesia. You know, as long as they're in, and then they take one position when it's convenient for them, which will segue us into the Speaker of the House. We're going to go to the state. Yeah, CJ.
Rob DeLeo is definitely a piece of work. This is the man who spearheaded the front to put a term limit on the Speaker's position to 8 years. That would be 4 terms because a House Representative's position is 2-year terms. So that would be 4 terms. And now that his end of life as a Speaker is coming up, what does he do? Political expedience. Let's spearhead legislation to remove the term limit on the Speaker of the House so that he can stay there. And here's what they're saying. Because of the new governor and the new leadership of the Senate, the state cannot afford to have new leadership in the House. It would be detrimental to the forward moving of the state. Have you ever heard a bigger line of crap in your life? I mean, I need some fertilizer. I think I'm just going to go collect it at the State House.
Look, I'll tell you one thing. That's the great thing about politicians. They can make up so much BS. They could justify anything. I mean, it's incredible. Now, they have professional spin doctors. That's what they do. They create. Now we need what? People voted people out because they weren't happy with their performance. Why do we need the same old, same old? They passed that term limit for a reason. They wanted to get rid of a speaker, DeMacy, right? So they couldn't get rid of him because look, for you people who aren't really attuned to politics in this state, the most powerful individual in the state of Massachusetts is not the governor. It's not the president of the Senate. It's the Speaker of the House. If you remember Finneran stopping the stadium for the Patriots, stopping the casinos single-handedly, how many Speaker of the Houses have been indicted during their term? They have absolute power up there. And when they're in, you can't get them out. They needed a reason for all the lemmings to make sure he stays in, because what happens with these people is without term limits, you never get them out unless they're put in jail and they're indicted. And that's what happens to most Speakers of the House. They ultimately get indicted for something. You can't get rid of them because they have such amazing power up there. They have absolute power up there. If you piss off the Speaker of the House, you'll never get a bill through. You'll never get a committee. You'll have an office in the toilet. It'll be like that movie Walking Tall when when a guy got elected sheriff and they stuck him in the toilet downstairs in the city hall or town hall. But that's the reality. And the reality is, again, politicians taking care of politicians. We said on a previous show, there's $1.6 million worth of pay raises set aside for them. There's pay raises for DAs, pay raises for judges, pay raises for everybody. But everybody but the people who work for a living, everybody that's trying to get enough money to feed their families. This is what's wrong with government. This is what's wrong with this nation. It's like we keep the same old people in there time and time and time again. It's disgusting to see what happens. And there's an absolute ignorant, nobody cares. It's like you don't pay attention. The fact is that that the House of Representatives gets an automatic pay raise. They don't have to ask for pay. They get a cost of living increase that is determined by them. I used to ask for that every single time I sat at the bargaining table during my tenure as president of a union. I would sit down and say, give me a cost of living increase like the politicians have. And the answer to that was absolutely not. We can't afford it. Well, we can't afford them anymore. And we can't afford to have him as Speaker of the House. But I guarantee he'll remain Speaker of the House.
Well, you know that because, our 3 lemmings here in the Fall River area are definitely going to vote to, rescind the 4-term limit. And, and that's the problem. They go in, they don't do what the people want, they do what the speaker wants. And this is why we have been fighting this battle over and over and over again for years. And whether you have people like the GOP, whether you have people like the National Republican Alliance or Assembly or whatever they call themselves, they all get called wingnuts. But they're actually looking at some of the things that are happening. I mean, I look at the Citizens for Limited Taxation, and they call this stuff out all the time, and nobody says anything bad about it at all. They can say nothing wrong. But we need to realize that we are the voter, we are the citizens, and you represent us. And maybe it is time for the people to have a massive revolt. We had a small one here in Fall River. Let's go to a statewide revolt. Let's demand term limits. Let's see how they like that. Not just at the Speaker of the House. Let's demand term limits, period. 2 terms. If it's good enough for the president, it's good enough for everyone else. Do you want to make a bet that if that question ever came to ballot, that the House and the Senate would immediately be changing terms on their offices so that they're no longer at 2 years? They'd be making them 4 or 6 years apiece. The Senate would be changing the term to 8 years. And the governor's term would change. And mayors, city councilors, and school committeemen, aldermen, selectmen, they'd all be changing their terms from 2-year terms to 8-year terms, if possible. They would all be doing it because they cannot live outside of the real world. They no longer know what a real world job is because they're 30 years in the House. They don't remember what it's like to be a teacher or a real estate broker or a doctor or a nurse. All they know now is how to do is move money around. Get it from this guy and put it in this pocket. Get it from that guy, put it in that pocket. This is where we are. This is Massachusetts.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, I think it's created in Massachusetts, but we have, wow, the heck was that? Somebody, the little feedback there on the mic, but we have definitely elevated this to an art form in Massachusetts. It's when you look at this and people say, well, it doesn't affect me. Yes, it does. Now it's tax season, people. When you file in your state tax, it ain't wine, and they raise taxes, and they increase, gas tax, cigarette tax, this tax, that tax, state income tax, federal income tax. You're paying every single day, when you go to work, if you're fortunate enough to have a job, you got to figure that about 1/3 of the time you're there, you're working for them to sit on their duffs and figure out ways to gouge more money. Do you think it's proper that judges get 23%? Do you think that 15% and 23% of the sheriffs, by the way, every single sheriff got a 23% increase? And if my memory serves me correctly, the people who work over for Sheriff Hodson are always complaining about they were some of the lowest paid corrections officers in the state of Massachusetts.
Actually, that's very true. When the DOC took over all the houses of correction, Bristol County was, at that time, the lowest paid house of correction in the Commonwealth. Everyone else in the Commonwealth came up to the state correctional officers' pay rates and pay scales. Bristol County did not.
Well, there's a classic example, though. Think about it, people. They always find money for themselves, but they never find money for us. They only know how to take money from us. And that's what's sad. And the sad fact is we can do this. We can overthrow the government if we get involved. If they don't want term limits, limit their term. Vote them out.
That's right.
Let's put it on the ballot. Let's get them. And as you said, if they attempt to increase their term, put it on the ballot. Fight them. We proved that fight can be won if you get together. And that's the thing. people with different political views. It's not a Republican issue or a Democratic issue or a conservative or a liberal or a Green Party. This is an issue of justice, of representation of the taxpayer, because they're all corrupt. As I said many times, the only difference, in my opinion, between a Republican and a Democrat in most cases, not all cases, but in most cases, is a Republican steals from the working man and gives it to the rich, and a Democrat steals from the working man and gives them a tiny bit back. But they're all picking our pockets. They're all picking our pockets. And we let them do it. I mean, I don't. but my vote is not worth it if the rest of the people don't show up at the polls or are oblivious. Remember what I said, the statistics I cited from the Boston Broadside. The pay raises, incredible. Every district attorney getting a salary up to $171,000 to mow. That's their base salary, $171,000 a year. That's just one of the pay raises I cited. And what do we say in a city? What do you do when you're working in Fall River for $34,000 for a household income?
If you're lucky.
If you're lucky enough to have a job, living in an apartment that's probably too small, still got a space heater. You gotta wear a sweatshirt around the house because you can't pay your heating bill. And these clowns are voting themselves 23% pay raises, 15% pay raises, and how much do they work? And then they get great pensions. And if their pension isn't quite good enough, if 80 or 90,000 isn't enough to live on, they give themselves a job in some other state agency with a bigger salary for 2 or 3 years and bump up their pension to $100,000. It is the politicians that have created the problem, and they've created an environment where they control us. And if you think you have a choice, you don't. The only choice you have is to vote them out, because in reality, if you don't vote, and if you don't vote them out, the only choice you'll have is paper, plastic, or green bag.
Well, personally, I think that, we've been fed a line of BS here in Fall River, from the purple bags, the pay-as-you-throw program, to the 90% street clearance, to the mayor will always be available. And now the city council has come out with a statement questioning the effectiveness or the competency of DCM in handling snow removal. Kind of a last-minute ditch effort to make yourself look good, in my opinion. But that's another show, believe me.
Well, we never run out of material. That's one thing.
And we can't write it. That's the problem. We can't write this stuff, and people don't understand it. I actually was asked that once. They said, "You guys write this stuff?" I'm like, "We don't have to. The city writes enough of it for us."
Well, let's just hope that we hear more. Everybody seems to be hunkered down, but we didn't even get into the these new jobs, and we have to do a really in-depth. We have to see what the city council is going to do. I think we've got a very, very potentially explosive issue here with these new jobs that coming in on their own without any reorganization, without any elimination. But we're going to save that for another show, because
they're not waiting. They're not waiting. They're bringing it back up at the ordinance meeting next week. So again, they're going to take that off the table. And while they had a backbone the other day, I honestly believe they're not going to have one this time out. So, it is what it is in Fall River, but, the sad thing is, it doesn't have to be. You and I started the process of changing this a long time ago, Chip, and hopefully we can continue the process, not only here in Fall River, but statewide. It's time for us to, be good about this.
Yeah, well, it's the people. The people have to rise up, just like we did here. We can do it statewide. So let's get involved and let's take some of our money back.
And let's make it happen here in Fall River. Drive safe this weekend. Have a great day and enjoy the Super Bowl Sunday. Bye-bye.
And avoid the yellow snow.